Hi, good to be with you again. Created Souls. This podcast, we discuss all things related to the soul, the significance of the soul and anthropology, and what it means to be a human in relation to the world, and how the soul itself matters, how the soul matters in terms of the meaning and purpose of the universe, which it does matter. Um, so I was recently at the Evangelical Philosophical Society, the Evangelical Theological Society, and one of the highlights, of course, was the symposium on my co-edited collection, The Origin of the Soul, a Conversation, which was a delightful panel discussion. And I think, as the panelist would say as well, I believe, um, similar to the book itself. It was pleasant and it was good, and it was even better than actually we anticipated. It was a great discussion overall, and there were many highlights from the discussion that raise all sorts of questions, as does the book. So do get the book, The Origin of the Soul, and let's have some discussions and conversations, further conversations about it, and we can think about it further. And if you need me to come out and speak on it, let's do that. And also, let's think about how it is that we can carry this forward and think about these things in more detail as I am presently optimizing Soul Science Ministries and propping it up and doing some work to get it more visible and to develop a kind of a bigger footprint online. Help me with that by, of course, liking, subscribing, and following Soul Science Ministries. And if you need me to come out, have me out. Or you need some coaching, consultation on any of these related issues, including authoring and writing, then do reach out to me and we can see if we can do that. We'll also be having a couple of courses in the future, particularly on anthropology and AI, as well as anthropology and transhumanism and the like. So if you're interested in that, reach out to me. Look out for the courses. Reach out to me. Let me know you're interested. If you're interested in getting some consultation or ongoing consultation about a book idea, or just about like your own research, and you want a mentor to study under, that's an opportunity as well through Soul Science Ministries and or through um, a couple of other avenues where I could lead you through your research and dissertation. So do consider that. And again, reach out to me and keep up with Soul Science Ministries. Now, on to the EPS Zoom, I'm sorry, the EPS uh, uh, symposium that we had on the origin of the soul, which comprised of J.T. Turner again, Joanna Leidenhag representing panpsychism, J.T. Turner representing his kind of corruptionist hylomorphism, of which he is defending a view that he says is neither creationist nor traducian. So he's kind of the odd one in the book and on the panel, but he's the one who, in many ways, we all would be most distinct from, dissimilar from. Of course, then there's Bruce Gordon offering his kind of weird, kind of Berkeleyan idealism that he derives from his views of information theory and integrated information theory, from sort of quantum from quantum physics, and of which he's been developing for years in different contexts. In this context, he develops it in view of, or in light of, a particular view of the soul's origin. So in that way, it's fascinating. And my view, of course, is the kind of creationist dualism, or a kind of situated in a more broad theistic dualism, or even a more broad kind of, you might think of it as Cartesian theism, where God is a God that we are like, as we are his image bearers, who is a mind and has ideas and discriminates between options. And he's the kind of substance that is necessary to create this kind of world that we exist in, and maybe just the kind of thing that creates us individually, directly and immediately, and through time. And I think there's something beautiful and attractive about that. And so that's what I defended in the book as well as on the panel discussion. But I wanted to share with you briefly some of my introductory comments that I made at the panel And so I wanted to just read that to you and share that with you. And if you're interested in doing more, listening to the whole discussion, then of course you can do that by once it should be published soon up online, and you can access it and listen to the whole panel, and we can have further discussions. And if you want to jump on and have some further talks on it, we could potentially do that. You want to jump on with a group of people and you want to work through some of these issues together, let's do that as well. Reach out to me through Soul Science Ministries. Reach out to me if we're connected through social media already, and let's make it happen. Let's do some stuff. Let's talk about these issues. Let's if you want to do some writing or researching and you want my help on that, through consultation, we can do that as well. Let's do it. I want to see these issues get out there. I want to see these issues really get out in the popular blogosphere even more because theism has something to offer, and particularly Christianity has something to offer that's not being addressed enough or focused on sufficiently. And there are all these New Age gurus, or what you might call cosmic consciousness thinkers, who are out there and thinking about all sorts of fascinating and interesting issues of which we Christians could learn from to some extent, and of which we need to offer an alternative view to some extent. So reach out to me again. Look up and follow me on Soul Science Ministries and look, yeah, soulscienceministries.com. Look for me, follow me on social media, follow this podcast. Let's go, let's do some work. And if you want to do some research and writing with me, then follow me there and reach out to me um, on social media or soulscienceministries.com. So, creationist dualism, I'm just going to read this for you, and hopefully it'll prompt some further discussion. There's been a long history of reflection on the nature of objectivity versus subjectivity, and it's this discussion that seems to characterize our discussion here. As we consider the nature of personal identity, we have 3 or 4 common models that characterize or give some sort of a say of the situation concerning what it is to identify as persons. The characteristics, properties, and features that comprise or serve as the conditions for describing personhood, in other words. Now, these include the body view, or in some cases, in different ways, the animalist view or the animalist tradition, of which we are just animals, even if highly complicated, uh, rational animals. The continuity view and the simple view. The continuity view says something like that I am comprised of my ideas over a long period of time, and that's what makes me me. Or the simple view, the idea that I am just a simple, and on the most radical version, I am just a metaphysical simple of which nothing else could adequately explain or account for what or who I am. But then there is this whole idea about the body view, of which most are in agreement in the panel as well as on the book, that bodies are insufficient. Physical things are insufficient. They're not the right sorts of things to describe personhood. They're not the right sorts of things to account for personhood. Unless and except you affirm something like the view that J.T. Turner does and Peter Van Inwagen, who affirms some form of animalism, that we just are described by our bodies in sufficiently complex or nuanced bodies, as it were. We are, to be more precise, biological organisms, and each body or this body has some particularizing feature or a property that makes this human body my human body. This, of course, opens the discussion to the kind and nature of human body, what we're talking about, and what it is that sufficiently points to personhood or sufficiently explains personhood. And again, I and most of the people on the panel and in the collection do not believe this is sufficient as an explanation. And it's unlikely to give us what we want and what we need regarding personhood or personal identity. Further, in order to posit what it is that is sufficient for personhood, Turner must affirm a rather dubious and highly contested category to get his hylomorphism, hylomorphism being the view, very roughly, that persons are complex compositions of matter and form. And they are comprised of matter and form, and they are, you might say, even in some views, the product of matter and form in some way. And this seems highly problematic. This doesn't seem to be adequate for personal identity. This doesn't get us at personal identity. It doesn't even come close, arguably. And then there's this whole idea about something of a primitive, what we might call kind of pure matter, or various terms given to it by hylomorphism, that it requires something to inform it to make it the distinctive type of thing that it is. But again, it's really not clear in terms of what the properties are. What would be the distinguishing or sufficient property or properties that could actually designate the person you, I or you? I, for one, don't believe this is possible, and it seems highly dubious that we could get at the kind of particularizing nature from hylomorphism on this sort of account of personal identity. It just doesn't seem to be the right sort of object or thing in question to get at us to the right answer. So it requires supplying an assay of a thisness, your individuality and my individuality, that doesn't even seem to be adequately described by the body or the bodily parts, the brain or whatnot, or even beyond that, the ideas themselves. There seems to be something more fundamental and substantial that undergirds the properties even themselves that makes you you and me. And so these views seem to be highly unlikely or dubious. But that aside for a moment, we're again, most of us in the volume are highly dubious about the success of hylomorphism. Instead, most of the advocates argue for the ontological categories of mind body and end up being quite close to one another. Again, this was an excellent collection that kind of, on the surface, these views look very similar, but end up looking very different in many ways, in complex and interesting ways that raise all sorts of questions. So back to the matter at hand, all of us affirm something of a mind-body dualism where the respective categories for making sense of personhood properly include some reference to consciousness, minds, and their ideas. In this way, they would be much closer to what's called the psychological tradition of personal identity, in contrast to the animalist tradition, and the mind would factor prominently in an assay or explanation given to personal identity. And I would venture further that in contrast to Turner's position, his sort of animalism, as well as Peter Van den Wagen's for that matter, um, they are much closer to one another in at least one of two ways, in contrast to J.T. Turner. First, they advance a more robust kind of dualism from Turner. They also affirm a robust form of immaterialism as the core of personal identity and something like a soul as the core that explains personhood and so much of the world. At least causally explains much of the world and the goings on, and all the interesting things in the world, at least. Further, they all, as far as I understand, would depart from some sort of continuous view of personal identity or some sort of Lockean compresence view where we are comprised of complex parts that make up personal identity. Instead, they affirm some kind of simplicity and something like even getting closer to Descartes' view. Of course, in one sense, Gordon's view departs on the nature of physical reality more than the others, at least more clearly, all the while his view remains the closest to mine, ironically, because it gives more weight to idealism concerning explanations and causal explanations in the natural world than the others. It also gives more of a place to the divine mind as an explanation that's causally and interacting in a more intimate way with the natural world. Secondly, all the views in contrast to Turner stick closer to the wider religious, specifically Christian tradition, insofar as they affirm or try to affirm or try to show that they have resources to logically make sense of survival, the fact that I will survive my bodily death in the afterlife. So in many ways, they all end up looking something like a simple view of personal identity and affirm something very close to some version of substance dualism. Of course, again, Gordon's view and how he designates matter or ontologically makes sense of matter is going to be quite different. And Leidenhag's view is going to be different in that she affirms something more closely related to maybe Leibniz's idealism or some version of substance dualism, of which some interpreters of Leibniz would say that he holds. Now, where I depart is more important and I think of interest. My view is that the more radical form of substance dualism, which I readily grant and embrace. It gives more credence to the immaterial subject into the mind in terms of causal explanations of the natural world, similar to Bruce Gordon's view. It is Cartesian, or you might call it neo-Cartesian, in that my view most naturally yields creationism, even a kind of intimate, direct, and immediate creationism of souls themselves, of which become important factors or features of the world in which we live. A much stronger view of creationism than is affirmed quite clearly on my view, and I see that as a positive, as a beautiful thing, and as it ends up being quite important or good argument at the end of the day for the existence of God. And I think that's a value in its favor. The person is not the kind of thing that can be sufficiently explained or designated by complexity. Sorry, Hasker, or at least in some writings, he seems to advocate for something like that, and that seems quite wrong. The parts themselves are insufficient. Even the collection of the parts themselves seem insufficient for describing you or for accounting for your personal identity as well as my personal identity. In fact, following somebody like John Foster and a stronger view of metaphysical simplicity, it seems that that is precisely what we need. And that's the hallmark of the Cartesian view, that there is some particularizing feature that is metaphysically simple in the truest sense of your soul that makes you you and me. And that seems to be a relief and quite, I think, quite appealing with respect to the view. There is no general parts or properties that could make you you. They would just be insufficient. So even Leibniz's principle of the indiscernibility of identicals wouldn't apply here in terms of personal identity. We need something else. Even the general patterns would seem to undermine that, or some sort of regular or universalizable patterns that uh, create or bring about or generate products. The product you say seems to be wholesale out of the picture for explaining these things, at least on the surface. And it seems that we need a much stronger, more direct or robust role in which God or something like a God or supernatural being is playing in terms of providing an explanation for the generation of you and I. And so something like creationism seems to be the better alternative if we are to take seriously personal identity and the nature of my personal identity and your personal identity, of which the products and the parts and the properties and the features and the generalizable features just do not seem to be sufficient. They just don't seem to give us an account that we need. Sorry to most of the analytic philosophers out there, it just doesn't seem to work. Um, that said, as I am closer to Gordon's view, I do think we're in an epistemic situation where common sense or something like common sense gets us to substance dualism or closer to something like substance dualism than idealist kind of immaterialism in the spirit of Berkeley or Bishop Berkeley's idealism or Bruce Gordon's idealism. And so that's why I affirm something like a more robust Cartesian substance dualism and even creationism at the end of the day. So again, let's continue this discussion. Reach out to me, follow, like, subscribe to Soul Science Ministries as well as the podcast. And let's continue the discussion. If you need any consultation or help or teaching on these issues, reach out to me. Reach out to soulscienceministries.com. Let's get together. Let's talk. Let's talk about these things further. Thanks.